Welcome back to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference and powering the good. And we love talking about technology, making your life easy, especially when you talk about the journey to the cloud. So that's why we're honored to have with us Sashank Purighalla, founder and CEO of BOS Framework. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Jeremy. How are you?
Doing well. And so you've been receiving a lot of notoriety, a lot of attention when you talk about the transition and making it easy, when you talk about technology and apps and developments and cybersecurity and everything in your world, but that journey to the cloud. And so let's start out. Give us a little background on BOS Framework, and then we'll dive in deep.
So BOS is a company that started essentially to solve the problem that I think exists in software in general, which is it's so unpredictable. It's so difficult for somebody to determine how much something costs, and about 70% of the projects fail. And that's a result of, I think, the immaturity that exists in the field. Jeremy, and I say this all the time, you spend $25,000 and you get a Honda Accord that you can drive for $200,000. $25,000 on the software side gets you probably a Sprint that's poorly done. And you're committing to God knows how many millions of dollars of continuing that. So it needs more predictability. And coming from a mechanical engineering background into computer science, I felt the need to create something that brings that predictability and certainty into software development. And that was the genesis of BOS about 5 years back.
And so talk about how the framework works. I mean, obviously you have a team of experts that make it seamless, but to be able to have the predictability to tie in the migration to the cloud, the app development, even the cybersecurity, there's a lot to what you do and a lot to making it very simple and easy to use. And so share some of the magic on how it works.
Let me try and explain BOS very easy in simple terms. So today you mentioned cloud, and almost every company is already in the cloud or is getting there. AI is the big buzzword. And what's the foundation to AI? It's data and cloud. So at least as it stands today, it's very, very important that companies think about doing their cloud right. So if you go and look at the top jobs available in the market, there are probably two types of jobs in the top ranking jobs, which is security and cloud and DevOps. The reason for this is every CIO is given this challenge of taking them from their existing setup to the cloud, a modernization, digital transformation initiative. So what we do is we help them simplify that journey, whether it's digital transformation or modernization, and help them get it done at half the cost and time. And to do that, we've taken a platform approach to bringing everything DevOps, everything cloud infrastructure together with ground-up security and compliance. And we make it all available through a single pane of glass. So as opposed to people doing it, it's robots doing it, so to speak, but it's highly customizable. So it's not like a manufactured home. It is actually building something that's very custom, except in a fraction of the time and cost through a platform.
Carry that into then the proprietary side of this in terms of, with AI and a lot of this, there's a fear around, well, if I share my institutional knowledge, does that then get shared with the world, and who owns that versus, a more protected approach? And so talk about kind of that side for companies of having the data protected, and working with you and your team on that side.
There are some very strong controls that are provided by public clouds. So whether it's AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, there are some strong boundaries in terms of accounts, in terms of virtual networks, in terms of DMZs. I don't want to get too technical, but in terms of how it's all protected. BOS sets all of this thing, all of the cloud infrastructure that it sets up in their cloud account, whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP or all of them. So in terms of security, in terms of compliance, it's basically only eliminating the human labor The way it's being done currently is you hire some experts and they set it up. And 80% of the reasons why people have cyber breaches is human error. So visualize the same thing being done through a platform, which is available through an interface in your cloud with customizations that your cloud people can do, except with guardrails that prevent them from committing those mistakes. And more importantly, when it's done 100 times, it's done exactly the same way and giving you 100% visibility into everything. So that's what BOS does, which is why we're moving so quickly into the enterprise space and increasingly into the smaller companies as well.
Yeah. And I've got to believe too, when you talk about this, geographical boundaries, there really are none for what you do because the business is an international landscape. And so talk about working in different areas, different states, different countries, talk about your reach.
Yeah, we've had some very interesting use cases there. So when you talk about international boundaries, it's one thing to say that technology is pervasive, so it's ubiquitous everywhere in the world. It's the same thing. Unlike accounting, let's say it's very bound to specific geographies. Technology, cloud is the same. But the challenge is when you go, let's say, to specific states in the US or specific countries across the world, let's say China, the data sovereignty laws and the laws around how compliance and regulation have to be honored and how data can or can't be shared, how it has to be stored. There are very geography specific rules and regulations that have to be conformed to. So what we do is make sure that those are brought into the platform and configurations and implementations. So when something is implemented, it's done in that manner. I'll give you a small use cases. We recently worked with a company that had the entire implementation in AWS, and they were working very well. A Chinese company looks at it, they like it very much, but they insist that it be on Azure China. Turns out, Azure China is a subset of Azure Global and fundamentally different from AWS. So short of standing up everything all from the scratch in AWS China, they had no other alternative. They went through two other vendors, it did not work. Then they come to BOS. And now what we have is parity between AWS and Azure China, while also honoring the Chinese regulation and ISO compliance without having to spend that kind of cost, time, and money. And it's a very, very custom solution. So it's just one example. We work with other companies in Canada, North America, and increasingly in other geographies as well.
It also shows, though, the depth of knowledge that you and your team have to have when you talk about the international regulations and the differences and all those nuances. There's a lot there. There's a lot at stake. And so obviously on your end, that's a great expertise in terms of having that institutional knowledge. Talk about being based in Middle Tennessee and what that means for you and your company and your team.
Middle Tennessee is a really, really good geography for us to be based in because there is increasing talent, increasing awareness, and people are hungry to grow and to prove themselves. Also, in the post-pandemic era, there is no restriction. I mean, one thing that the COVID pandemic has done is it's broken all the barriers in terms of where you can work from and where you can hire. So we have a pretty geographically spread out global team of people. And being in Middle Tennessee, me being in Nashville with some of my core team members has been phenomenal because let's say getting in touch with a CIO of a large corporation is not, 18,000 phone calls. It's basically meeting him or her at the local tech event and saying, hey, can we grab a cup of coffee? And then getting, into their door. They're also more forgiving. And what does a startup, especially trying to really prove a difficult use case need? It's opportunity. So there's plenty of that here, and the local community here has been phenomenal.
Share a little bit about, from your personal vantage point, you've worked with startups, you've worked with very large companies. And so you were able to identify the gap, but also too a lot of the similarities that you were seeing throughout your career that ultimately helped you create BOS Framework. And so give a little bit of a glimpse into that side of things for you personally.
Personally, this has been a phenomenally enriching journey because everybody that's been an entrepreneur or a leader in a large enterprise understands how much that one learning experience uh, gives that person. I've been very fortunate in being able to deal with dozens of startups. In any given week, I'm probably talking to 5 different startup founders that are all solving very different problems, creating jobs, and trying to bring some uniqueness into the world. And I am preview into the details of what they're going through. So the learning as a result is exponentially higher. And obviously that translates into how we are now able to build a larger platform, because that cross-pollination is so unbelievably important, because the way a problem is being solved, let's say effectively in the healthcare industry, may be applicable in the education sector, and in the same way in a fintech market, and vice versa. So now what we have the ability to do is get this knowledge that's acquired from various locations, take advantage of the fact that we're still very young and small, and we don't have a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, and I get to be the decision maker. And as an engineer, it's also a CEO, I get to understand both the technology as well as the strategic aspects of how something has to be done and how do you do it in the most cost-effective manner. This cross-pollination, this constant learning on a daily basis, you get to be a better version of yourself and build a better version of your company almost all the time, several times a day, many times. And it also toughens you up. So it's been very, very rewarding.
What has your attention? Because obviously you mentioned the proliferation of AI, of artificial intelligence, and how that's playing a critical role, especially obviously with the transition as just about every single company moves to the cloud in some way. So that creates opportunities. You've talked about too the efficiencies when you talk about BOS Framework and being able to cut down the time that it takes to be able to leverage the new applications, to develop the new applications, all of those efficiencies. What has your attention, though, in terms of kind of where things are headed and the opportunities, especially tied to BOS Framework?
Specifically in terms of AI, I think AI is here to stay, and AI is incredible because the way I look at it, it helps you function at the top of your value chain because it removes all the grunt work. What is probably considered knowledge work here today will become more and more grunt work in the times to come, is how I think about it. I mean, think about how things were 20 years back when we started. What was highly skilled work is today available with a click of a button. So AI is going to do much the same. So what AI brings to the table in terms of what it represents for future work is squarely in line with what BOS represents, which is the future of work and how things need to be done. What is considered by many as the job of an expert, we provide with a simple interface that is customizable and it's in somebody's hands. We leverage AI in the same manner. So AI is available at 3 different levels within the BOS framework, and it's increasingly becoming a reality. I don't want to claim like we're already there. It's in the works, but definitely in the area of security, to be able to auto-detect threats and remediate them in real time, near real time at least, because those machine learning patterns that we are able to incorporate and leverage have been phenomenal, as well as in the DevOps CI/CD space, as well as in the cloud infrastructure space. Being able to, I've had this long-term vision, Jeremy, of being able to use natural language and being able to just tell the cloud system, let's just say, hey, boss, create a Kubernetes infrastructure for me with these specific parameters, and then it asks you a question back. So this was aspirational until recently with the onset of what we're seeing in OpenAI and some of the other patterns. This is becoming a reality sooner than I'd have hoped. So it's been great. I'm very, very positive and optimistic about it. And I think it's going to be a great future few set of years for all of us.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you're already in tune with how it can benefit your company and obviously your clients and beyond. And so when you start connecting the dots already, it's like this is where we're headed, but this is how it can help and add value. That's a huge advantage. And so wrap up with website, where we can go to learn more. How can companies take those next steps to reach out and obviously, start the process of working with BOS Framework?
Firstly, I'll say two things. If you're thinking about hiring a cloud ops or a DevOps engineer or a security or a compliance expert, look at BOS Framework before you do that, because we could probably help avoid you hiring expensive resources and worry about retaining them, training them up, etc., and wait many months to get results out of them. We can shortchange that entire thing. And think of BOS as cloud operations in a box. So with that said, you can find us on our website, bosframework.com. We are on LinkedIn, and you can just Google bosframework.com. It's becoming increasingly popular, and there are several articles about us. So that's it.
That makes it easy. bosframework.com, BOS framework.com. Sashank, thank you for all you and your amazing team do. Thank you for coming on the show.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me over, Jeremy.